My name is Muthoki Mumo. I am the Sub-Saharan Africa representative for the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ. We are an international press freedom organization. I am speaking to you today from Nairobi, and I am honored to join you in the commemoration of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. I will speak briefly to provide a regional context for the dialogue we are having today on the question of impunity. First, some figures. 278 journalists have been murdered over the last decade, according to our research at CPJ. This number does not include journalists who were killed in conflict situation, covering combat caught in crossfire, for instance. It doesn't include journalists who were on dangerous assignments. These 278 journalists were deliberately targeted and murdered in connection to their work. And in 81% of those cases, there has been complete impunity. No one has been convicted. No one has been held accountable for the murders of these journalists. Now, unfortunately, some of the countries with the worst records when it comes to impunity in murders of journalists are right here in our region, in the Eastern Horn of Africa region. For instance, Somalia has for a long time, for years, been at the top of CPJ's impunity index. The index is an annual report that spotlights countries where the murderers of journalists are not brought to justice. South Sudan also features prominently on that index. Now, this is a reflection of how conflict, political instability, and weak judicial mechanisms come together to enforce a cycle of violence against journalists. But if you look beyond those two countries, if you look beyond Somalia and South Sudan, the rest of the region doesn't look so good either. Things are not rosy. For instance, the journalist community here in Kenya continues to demand justice for Francis Nyaruri and John Kitui, two journalists whose fearless coverage of corruption and politics led to their murders. And if you look at Ethiopia, this year, for the first time since 1998, we at CPJ documented the killings of two journalists. Now, that's a reflection of the drastic deterioration in the press freedom environment in Ethiopia, particularly since the start of the Tigray War. Now, these numbers, these figures are startling, but let's not forget the stories that they tell. These are stories of lives lost. These are stories of families and friends who continue to live without answers, who continue to live without justice. These are the stories of the colleagues of these journalists who must now work in an environment of fear, always wondering, could I suffer a similar fate? Could it be me if I told similarly critical stories of politics or of human rights or of corruption? But this is also about untold stories. Stories that remain untold because journalists were silenced. Now, impunity doesn't just manifest when journalists are fatally attacked. For instance, if we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that in this region, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Rwanda, the COVID-19 pandemic has been associated with a rise in the harassment, in attacks, in the arrests of journalists. And we know that in Uganda, during the recent election season, numerous journalists were assaulted, were harassed, had their equipment damaged, and some of them were even shot at while covering the elections and the campaigns that led up to them. And in Tanzania and in Burundi, the journalist communities continue to demand answers about the fates of Jean Bigirimana and Azori Gwanda, two journalists who've been missing for years without credible investigations. Now, when you look at all these incidents, Whether it's a knife attack in Somalia that kills a journalist, whether it's a journalist beaten in Kampala, whether it's a journalist killed in Ethiopia, there's a thread that runs through, and that thread is impunity. The failure to hold perpetrators accountable in credible and transparent processes creates an environment, nurtures a culture where others know they can attack journalists without consequence. It creates a culture and environment where some even believe, indeed know, that they can kill journalists without consequence. The way forward, the answers, I think at the base of it, quite simple. No attack must go unaddressed. Not even what you consider the smallest of attacks should go unaddressed. All the perpetrators should be held accountable in processes that are fair, credible, and transparent. This is how we push back. This is how we hold the line. This is how we fight against impunity and attacks on journalists. And I want to challenge the public officials in this room to do what is their duty to ensure that justice is delivered for Ugandan journalists in every single incident of an attack on them. And I want to challenge everyone in this room to consider that this struggle against impunity transcends our national borders. As you fight for safety at home, consider the situation of the journalists operating in Somalia or in South Sudan or in Ethiopia. Tell their stories, demand justice on their behalf, and stand in solidarity for them. Because when things become difficult for you, we also hope that they will also come and tell you stories and stand in solidarity for you and demand justice on your behalf. We must all stand together across borders in this struggle against impunity. Thank you very much.